The mist came off the marsh the way it always did in late September. Slow, like it was thinking about something. I'd been awake since 4, couldn't sleep. There's a kind of waiting that gets into your bones, and I'd had it since the letter came 3 weeks back. The letter on thick paper, the royal crest at the top, the polite phrasing. His Royal Highness would be most grateful if a visit could be arranged. I stood at the gate of the south field with my hands in my coat pockets and watched the light come up over the wheat stubble. The harvest was in. The fields were bare and brown and waiting for the drill. Out past the hedgerow I could see the dike, and past the dike the marsh, and past the marsh the gray line of the sea. North Norfolk. My whole life lived inside 10 miles of this gate. I'm Edmund Hollins, 64 years old this winter. Marshlight Farm has been in my family since 1898. My great-grandfather bought it with money he made on a herring boat out of Wells. My grandfather worked it through 2 wars. My father died in the kitchen at the age of 71, still in his boots. I have farmed this land for 40 years, 400 acres of clay and silt and worry. And today, at 9:30, a future king was going to drive up my lane. I should have been more impressed with myself, I suppose, but I wasn't. I was tired, and I was watching for a bird. There, over the far hedge, a small dark shape lifting, climbing, hanging. A skylark. I hadn't seen one over these fields in 3 full seasons. 3 years of looking up and finding nothing. Margaret used to point them out to me when we walked the boundary in spring. She'd stop and tip her head back and just listen. "Edmund," she'd say, "listen to that. That's the sound of the land being all right." She passed in 2019. The skylarks went not long after. I told myself it was the weather. Then I told myself it was the foxes. Then I'd stopped telling myself anything. The bird hung up there in the gray morning, doing what skylarks do, singing into nothing. I watched it until my neck ached. Then I turned back to the house. In the kitchen, the kettle was just coming on. I made tea the way my father made it, strong enough to stand a spoon in. I drank it standing at the window. The dog, Bess, lay by the range and watched me with one eye. At 8:15, the first van arrived. Police. 2 men in suits who walked the lane and looked at the hedges and spoke into their sleeves. Then a second vehicle. Then a woman with a clipboard who introduced herself and asked if I had any questions about how the visit would proceed. I told her I did not. She seemed relieved. At 9:20, I put on my good jacket, the one Margaret bought me for our anniversary in 2017, tweed, a bit tight now across the shoulders. I looked at myself in the hall mirror and didn't much like what I saw, an old man with thin hair and a face the color of a wet brick. I went outside. The convoy came up the lane at exactly 9:30. 3 vehicles, a black Range Rover in the middle. The doors opened and people got out, but I wasn't watching them. I was watching the second Range Rover, the one behind, because I knew who would be in it. She got out wearing a dark green field jacket and boots that were too clean. Her hair was tied back. She was 36 years old and she looked so much like her mother that for a second I had to look at the ground. Elena, my daughter. I hadn't stood within 10 feet of her in 6 years. She saw me. She didn't smile. She gave a small nod. Then she turned to the man getting out of the middle vehicle, and I lifted my eyes, and there he was. Tall, coat open, a friendly, slightly tired face. He shook hands with the woman with the clipboard, then with the head of the police detail. Then he looked across the gravel at me, and he walked over and he put out his hand. I shook it. I think I said, "Your Royal Highness." I think he said something kind back. The truth is my ears were full of a roaring sound and I couldn't hear properly. Behind him, Elena was unloading a flat black case from the boot, a drone case. The thing I'd argued with her about for 2 solid years before she finally left. He was saying something about being grateful, about the farm, about the work that was being done here. I nodded, I said something back, the right thing, I hope. And then we all walked down towards the south field because that's where the demonstration was going to happen. The light had broken through. The mist was lifting off the dike. The skylark was gone. But I had seen it. To understand what happened in that field, you have to understand what came before. I took over Marshlight in 1985, the year I turned 23. My father had a stroke in the milking parlor and was in a chair within a fortnight. He lived another 4 years, but he never farmed again. He used to sit by the window in the front room and watch me cross the yard in the morning, and I would lift my hand to him, and he would lift his, and that was how we spoke. I married Margaret in 1987. She was a teacher from Holt. She had a laugh you could hear from the far field. We had a leaner in 1989. The 80s and 90s were good years for us. Not rich years. Farming is never rich, but good. The yields were strong. The soil was alive. I remember turning the south field over in spring and the smell of it coming up, that black sweet smell, the smell of earthworms and rotted straw and 100 years of good muck. You can tell a healthy soil by the smell. My father taught me that. Then the 2000s came. I don't know exactly when it started to go wrong. It was slow. You don't notice slow. The yields began to soften. We pushed more fertilizer onto the fields to keep them up. Nitrogen mostly, big bags of it. The cost crept up year on year. The yields crept down. We pushed more on. The soil stopped smelling sweet. It started smelling of nothing. The earthworms got harder to find. By 2015, I was spending 42,000 pounds a year on chemical inputs and pulling in barely enough to cover them. By 2018, it was worse. I was borrowing against the next harvest before the current one was in. Margaret knew. She never said. She just made tea and rubbed my shoulders at the table and asked me if I'd been to see the doctor about the pain in my back. In 2017, Alina came home from her second year at university and sat at the kitchen table and told us she was changing her degree from environmental science to agricultural technology. She said she wanted to come back and work the farm. With drones, she said. With software. With satellite data. I laughed at her. I shouldn't have, but I did. I told her this land had been farmed by Holly's hands for 4 generations, and it would not be farmed by computers. I told her that the soil knew us and we knew it, and there was no algorithm for that. I was tired and I was scared, and I said cruel things. Margaret stood at the sink and didn't turn around. Alina finished her degree. She got a master's. She got a job with a precision agriculture firm in Cambridge. She came home for Christmas in 2019, 3 months after her mother died, and she sat across the kitchen table from me, and she told me quietly that the farm was going to fail unless I let her help. I told her the farm had been failing for 10 years, and I didn't need her to tell me. She left the next morning before I was up. There was a note on the table. Dad, I love you. Call me when you're ready. I never called. 6 years. 6 years of birthdays I didn't ring on. Christmases she spent in Cambridge or abroad. 2 cards a year from her, regular as the time. I kept them all in the dresser drawer. I never wrote back. In the spring of this year, a man from the Soil Association came to do an assessment for a government scheme. He took samples from 4 of my fields. He sent the report a fortnight later. The organic matter in the south field was down to 1.1%. He said in the letter, very politely, that the soil was effectively dead, that without intervention, I would be farming on dust within 5 years. I read the letter 3 times, then I put it in the drawer with the cards. A week after that, I had a phone call from a number I didn't know. A woman from a charitable trust connected to the royal household. She said His Royal Highness was visiting Norfolk in September as part of a series of engagements on sustainable agriculture. She said my daughter's firm had been recommended as one of the leading precision farming groups in East Anglia, and that they had asked specifically whether the demonstration could take place at the home farm. The family farm, she said. We understand that would be meaningful. I sat at the kitchen table with the phone in my hand for a long time after she rang off. Then I called Alina. It was the first time in 6 years. She picked up on the second ring. She didn't say hello, she just waited. I said they've asked if it can happen here. She said, I know. I asked them to ask you. I said, why? She said, because it's still your farm, Dad, and because Mom would have wanted it. I didn't say anything for a while. Then I said, all right. That was the whole conversation. And now here she was, on my gravel, unloading a drone case from the back of a Range Rover, with the future King of England standing 6 feet from me, asking about the rotation on the south field. The demonstration was set up in the lower part of the south field, where the ground dips down towards the dike. A trestle table had been put up with a laptop on it and 2 tablets and a coffee flask. 2 of Alina's colleagues were already there. A young woman called Priya, who was the firm's lead agronomist, and a man called Thomas, who handled the drone flight systems. They had laid out a small display of equipment on a tarpaulin, a multispectral camera, a soil probe, a printed map of my farm with patches of color on it, reds and yellows and greens. They had been here since 7, Alina told the visiting party. They had already done the morning flight. His Royal Highness walked along the edge of the tarpaulin with his hands in his coat pockets and asked questions. He asked them well. You could tell he had been briefed, but you could also tell he was actually listening to the answers, which is a thing not all important people do. He asked Priya about nitrogen runoff into the dike, and from there into the marsh, and from there into the sea. He asked Thomas how many farms in the county were now using the system. He asked Alina, and this was the moment I felt my chest go tight. He asked Alina what made her come back to Norfolk to do this work. She said, because my father's farm is dying, sir, and I think we can save it, and I think there are 10,000 farms like his. She didn't look at me when she said it, but I felt it land. Thomas lifted the drone off the tarpaulin and powered it up. It was bigger than I expected, about the size of a large hawk, with 4 arms and a camera unit slung underneath. He set it on a flat patch of ground and stepped back with the controller. It rose into the air with a sound like a swarm. I'd seen drones before, of course. Everyone has, but I had never watched one work my own land. It climbed to about 120 feet and then it began to move in long straight lines across the field, north to south, then a shift sideways, then south to north. A grid. It was mapping. Alina stood beside the laptop with Priya and they watched a screen that I couldn't quite see. The prince stood behind them. I stood at the back by the gate with my arms folded. After about 12 minutes, the drone came back and settled. Thomas lifted it onto the tarpaulin and unclipped the camera unit. Priya plugged it into the laptop and they all leaned in. The screen showed my south field from above, but not as I had ever seen it. There were colors laid over the bare earth. Most of it was a pale, washed-out yellow. There were patches of red along the western edge. There were a few small green spots near the dike. Alina began to explain what we were looking at. She used short words. She didn't talk down to me, but she didn't show off either. She was good at it. Margaret would have been proud. The yellow, she said, was soil with very low organic matter and poor nutrient retention. Most of the field. The red patches along the western edge were where chemical fertilizer had been overapplied for years and the soil structure had collapsed. The green spots near the dike were where the field had drained naturally and a bit of life had hung on. She said, Dad, you've been putting the same amount of nitrogen on this whole field every spring for 40 years, but the field doesn't need the same amount everywhere. The red patches don't need any more. The yellow patches need a different fix entirely. They need organic matter, not chemicals. The green patches need almost nothing. If we map the field properly and apply variably, we can cut your fertilizer use by 60% in the first year, maybe 70. I said 60%. She said yes. I said that's 25,000 pounds. She said yes, Dad. The prince was watching me, not in a pushy way, just watching. I said, show me the red patch. She did. She zoomed in on the laptop. I could see the corner of the field, the bit by the old oak. I knew that bit. I had plowed it 1,000 times. I had never been able to get a good crop out of it. I had always blamed the drainage. It wasn't the drainage, it was me, 40 years of me. I felt something move in my chest, not anger, something quieter and worse. I said, right, and I turned around and walked off down the field towards the dike. I heard the conversation behind me carry on for a few minutes. Then I heard footsteps on the stubble. I thought it would be a leaner. It wasn't. He caught up with me at the corner where the hedgerow turns east. The blackthorn was heavy with sloes. The light was coming through gray and gold off the marsh. He had his hands in his coat pockets the way he had on the gravel. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just stood beside me and looked at the hedge. After a while, he said something about the hedgerow being a good one. Old, properly laid. He asked who had laid it. I said my father, in 1962. He nodded. I want to be careful here, because what was said between us in the next 10 minutes was a private conversation between two men standing by a Norfolk hedge, and I don't intend to repeat the half of it. I'll tell you the shape of it. He didn't lecture me. He didn't tell me what to do. He didn't tell me drones were the future or that I had been wrong to resist them. He spoke about his own children, about land, about what it means to look after something you didn't make and won't outlive. He spoke about his grandmother a little and his mother. He spoke about what gets handed down and what gets dropped. Then he said something I will remember. He said, in substance, and I'm paraphrasing because I won't put words in his mouth, that the people who love the land most are often the ones who find it hardest to change how they treat it. Because changing how you treat it can feel like admitting you got it wrong. And admitting you got it wrong when you've spent 40 years giving everything you had is the hardest thing a man can do. I looked at the sloes. They were almost black, ready. I said I told her she was wrong. My daughter. I told her for 2 years she was wrong. He said, paraphrasing again, that it took courage to say that out loud. I said she left because of me. She came home this morning because of him. And I meant him as in himself. As in, she only got to step back onto this farm because a future king had asked. He was quiet for a bit. Then he said, more or less, that it didn't sound to him like she came home this morning because of him at all. It sounded to him like she came home because she had been waiting 6 years for an excuse. The skylark went up. I don't know where it came from. It came up out of the long grass at the edge of the dike, the way they do, and it climbed straight up into the gray, climbing and hanging, and it sang. He looked up, he smiled. He said, that's a good sound. I said, my wife used to say that. He didn't answer that. He just stood and listened with me until the bird stopped. Then he said it was time he was getting back to the others. He clapped me very lightly on the shoulder. He walked back up the field. I stood at the hedge for a long while. When I came back up to the trestle table, the demonstration was finishing. The drone was packed away. The convoy was getting ready to move on. The next engagement was in Fakenham at 1 o'clock. He shook my hand again before he got into the Range Rover. He thanked me for letting them come. He said something kind to a leaner. He got in. The doors closed. The convoy moved off down the lane. The dust hung in the air for a long time after they were gone. The film crew packed up. The woman with the clipboard shook my hand and thanked me and gave me a card. Priya and Thomas loaded their equipment into a white van, and Thomas waved at me and said it had been an honor, sir, which I thought was a strange thing to say to a man with mud on his boots, but I appreciated it. They drove off. Alina stayed. She stood at the trestle table with her hands in her coat pockets and watched the last vehicle go down the lane. Then she turned around and looked at me. For a long time, neither of us said anything. She had a smudge of soil on her cheek. The wind had pulled some of her hair out of the tie. She looked 36 and she looked 12, both at once. I have never known how parents do that. How you can look at your grown child and see every age they have ever been laid on top of them like a transparency. I said, Alina, She said, "Dad." I said, "Come up to the house." We walked up the lane together. Bess came out to meet us at the gate and went mad over Alina for a full minute, leaning against her legs and crying like a puppy. Alina crouched down and put her face into Bess's neck and stayed there a bit longer than she needed to. I looked at the sky. In the kitchen, I put the kettle on. She sat at the table where her mother used to sit. I made tea. I put a mug down in front of her. She wrapped her hands around it. I went into the hall. I opened the top drawer of the dresser. Under a stack of folded napkins was a small leather notebook with a black cover, soft from use. My grandfather's soil testing book, the one he started in 1949, the one my father had added to until 1989, the one I had added to once or twice in the early years and then stopped because I had thought I knew better. I came back into the kitchen and I put the notebook down on the table in front of her. She looked at it. She didn't pick it up straight away. I said, "Your great-grandfather started this. Your grandfather kept it up. There's a system in there. He used to test every field 3 times a year. He kept a record going back to 1949. I haven't added to it properly since your mother got ill." She still didn't pick it up. I said, "I should have given it to you when you came home in 2019. She put her hand on it, flat, like she was checking it was real. She didn't open it. She said, "Dad." I said, "I know." She said, "I'm sorry I left like I did." I said, "You shouldn't be sorry for that." She said, "Yes, I should. I should have come back sooner." I said, "No." We sat, the kettle clicked off. Outside, a wood pigeon was going on in the chestnut. After a while, she said, "Will you walk the south field with me, now, while the light's still good?" I said, "Yes." We walked the south field together for the first time in I don't know how long. She had her tablet with her. She showed me the map again, the color map, the red and yellow and green. She walked me to the patch by the old oak. She knelt down and pushed her fingers into the soil. She made me kneel down and do the same. The earth was gray and dry and crumbled wrong in my hand. There was nothing alive in it. She said, "We start here, Dad. We start with this corner. We get organic matter in. We stop putting nitrogen on it. We give it 3 years. And we put a strip of wildflower along that edge there by the hedge." I said, 3 years is a long time. She said, "It's nothing. Compared to 4 generations, 3 years is nothing." The light was turning. The marsh was going gold at the edges. The dike was black water. She said, "And we get the skylarks back." I said, "I saw one this morning." She looked at me. I said, "Over the far hedge, before any of you got here. The first one I've seen in 3 years." She didn't say anything. She just put her hand on my arm. We stood there in the south field with the light going down behind us, a father and a daughter. A dead patch of soil between us. 40 years of stubbornness lying down at last in the stubble. I won't pretend that fixed everything. It didn't. We had a long way to walk. We still have a long way to walk. But that evening, standing in that field, was the first evening of the rest of it. That was last September. It is now this September, a year on, almost to the day. The south field is in winter wheat. The red patch by the old oak is sown to a clover and vetch mix, and we have not put a single bag of chemical fertilizer on it since the visit. The drone goes up over the farm twice a month. Priya comes out from Cambridge every 6 weeks. Alina lives in the cottage at the end of the lane, the one we used to let out for holidays. She bought it from me for £1. I insisted on the pound. She insisted on the receipt. The numbers are these. Chemical fertilizer use across the farm is down 62% on last year. Yields are down 4%, which is less than we expected and a great deal less than I feared. Input costs are down £28,000. The soil organic matter in the south field has come up from 1.1 to 1.4. Alina says by year 3 it should be at 2. By year 5, 2.5. Margaret would have laughed at me for caring about a decimal point. I care about it more than I have cared about anything in a long time. The skylarks are back. We counted 9 breeding pairs across the farm this spring. Last year there was one. The year before there was none. There are other things I could tell you. The lapwings came back to the wet corner by the dike. The bees did well on the wildflower strip. A short film crew came out from London in June and made a small piece about the farm and the technology and the family. I declined to be in it. Alina was in it. She was good. She wore the same green jacket. She still doesn't smile enough on camera. She got that from me. Sometimes in the morning, I walk down to the south field before the light is properly up. I stand at the gate where I stood that morning a year ago. I watch the mist come off the marsh. I listen. If I wait long enough, usually I hear it. The skylark goes up out of the long grass, and it climbs, and it hangs there in the gray morning singing into nothing. The way they have done over this land for 1,000 years. The way they did for my great-grandfather and my grandfather and my father. The way they did for Margaret. The way I had stopped believing they ever would again. I stand at the gate and I listen. And I think about the man who walked back up the field with his hands in his coat pockets a year ago and said it was a good sound. He was right. It is. It is the sound of the land being all right. And the truth of it, the thing I have learned in this one strange year is this. A farm is not a thing you own. A farm is a thing you are passing through. You get it from someone. You give it to someone. What matters is the condition you hand it on in. I was going to hand mine on his dust. My daughter came home and would not let me. I will tell you the last thing, and then I will stop. Last week I opened the little leather notebook for the first time since I put it on the kitchen table. Alina had been writing in it. New entries in her handwriting going back 6 months. Soil readings, field by field, date by date. On the inside of the back cover, in pencil in her small, careful hand, she had written one line. For Dad and for Mum and for whoever comes after us. I closed the book and I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then I went out into the yard and the dog came with me and the light was coming up clean over the marsh and somewhere out over the south field, very high and very faint, a bird was singing.